Welcome back to the Westminster Chess Club in London, 1834. It's match 3, game number 4, and it's the first to 6 wins. The score is standing at 1 game all, and good old Mr. George Walker is ready to note down the moves so that we can all enjoy them nearly 200 years later. Mr. Jack Hackett's ready to comment. Labourdonnais up there is impatient for the game to begin, and McDonnell has a new pair of shades as the old ones were faulty. So let's try them on. Yep, they're looking good, so all ready to start. McDonnell has the white pieces, he opens with d4, d5, and McDonnell plays c4, so the Queen's Gambit, and as we know, all gentlemen must accept a gambit, except Labourdonnais is French, and he plays e6. Now, this is London. You cannot just not accept the Queen's Gambit. So the men at the back start passing out the courier chessboards that have been in storage since Oliver Cromwell refused the King's Gambit in the 1600s and started a civil war. As we know, these 12 by 8 boards are very good in a fight. In short, it's all about to kick off. But good old Mr. George Walker, he knows exactly what to do. He calmly notes down the move, and then he orders another round of drinks for everybody, and gradually things start to settle down. And the game continues, albeit with an undertone of menace and uncertainty. McDonnell gingerly plays knight to c3. He's not quite sure exactly what to do. He's never been in this situation before. We have knight to f6 from Labourdonnais. McDonnell just makes sure he is actually witnessing this. He is, so he carries on. We have knight to f3 and c5 from Labourdonnais, still refusing to accept the gambit pawn. And finally, McDonnell gives in to the pressure and uses the gambit pawn to capture the d-pawn. Labourdonnais captures it back and the game continues. Bishop to g5, pinning the knight against the queen, and just calmly developing here, bishop to e6. e3 from McDonnell, letting his light square bishop out, knight to c6. So both players just developing as if they are normal modern players. In fact, I find this a very modern style of game they're playing here. We have bishop to d3 and bishop to e7, both players clearing a path to castling. But before that, we have d-pawn captures on c5, and the bishop moves twice to recapture the pawn. And now McDonnell castles, getting his king to safety. h6 from Labourdonnais here, chasing away the bishops. So the bishop captures the knight, the queen captures back, and McDonnell brings his rook over to c1 on the open file here. And you notice this bishop isn't defended by anything, so Labourdonnais decides to bring it back to d6 out of the path of the rook. Bishop to b5, pinning the knight, but Labourdonnais just simply castles to break the pins, so very nice from him. And here McDonnell decides to capture the centre pawn with his knight, attacking the queen. The bishop is attacking the knight, but the queen's defending it, so the bishop's probably not going to take. However, moving from the c3 square left this pawn undefended, and the queen simply captures it. So McDonnell moves his rook over to try to chase the queen away and defend the bishop here at the same time. So the queen moves to a3, and McDonnell decides that he's going to push his e-pawn to give some extra backup to this knight. Rook on a to d8 from Labourdonnais, and knight to d2 from McDonnell, defending this pawn. And Labourdonnais pushes his wing pawn to start attacking the bishop, so the bishop retreats to c4, but the pawns keep on coming, and again the bishop retreats all the way back to b3. Labourdonnais plays knight to d4, and there's nothing backing up this knight, so it looks like he's just going for an all-out attack on the light square bishop. Now, Mr. Jack Hackett told me earlier, when he was sober, that McDonnell should just play knight f3 and he'll be reasonably okay. For example, after the knight captures the bishop, the pawn captures back, the bishop comes back to b8, trying to attack the queen down here. McDonnell can just move the rook aside and the queen can back off, and everything's reasonably okay. But McDonnell didn't play this knight to f3 move. Instead, he played his queen to h5, and we'll see what happens. We have the knight capturing the bishop. McDonnell here should probably capture with the pawn, but instead he captures with the knight for some reason and gives up his a-pawn. So not so good, McDonnell. You're now a pawn down, I believe. 5 pawns plays 4, yes. Now again, Mr. Hackett says that a good move for McDonnell here would be to bring his other rook over to bring some more power towards the centre of the board. But McDonnell did not play that. He played his knight to d4 instead, threatening the bishop here. But here, Labourdonnais is completely winning, because after capturing the bishop and the pawn captures back and bringing the knight to say c5, Labourdonnais is going to be able to capture this pawn. There's no way that McDonnell can defend it anymore. There's two pieces attacking and only one piece defending, with no other pieces available to come over and help. But luckily for McDonnell, Labourdonnais did not spot this. Instead, Labourdonnais played his queen to c4, and the game continues. Labourdonnais is still one pawn up, but it could have been worse, so that was a close call. We have rook on f to d1 now, a little bit late. Now we have bishop captures on d5, and the pawn captures back. Rook on f to e8, getting on the open file, and rook on b to c1, attacking the queen again. So the queen again moves back to a2, where it came from earlier. We have knight to f5, attacking the bishop, but Labourdonnais doesn't mind. He just brings his queen over to e2, offering a queen exchange. And he's also getting out of the way of these two connected passed pawns on the wing, which are looking extremely dangerous. Much more dangerous, in fact, than McDonnell's isolated central solitary passed pawn in the middle of the board. So McDonnell really doesn't want to go for the queen exchange. He wants to keep his queen on the table to try to have some chances in this game. Labourdonnais keeps pushing the pawns now. b4. In response, McDonnell pushes his own king pawn, which looks a little bit rash, but we'll see how this works out for him. We have a5 continuing to push, and McDonnell decides to do something about the queen. He brings his rook across to attack it on e1. Now, interestingly here, Labourdonnais decides that he's going to give up his queen for the two rooks. So there we go, we have a capture fest on e1, ending with a check on the king, and the king moves to g2. Now you can see that Labourdonnais is left with two rooks to McDonnell's queen. He's got the connected passed pawns on the wing. McDonnell's got the passed pawn in the center. I think this is fine for Labourdonnais. He is actually winning significantly by now, according to Mr. Hackett. Labourdonnais continues pushing his pawns with a4, and McDonnell plays his queen to h4, which is quite interesting. It threatens this rook, and it's also x-raying the other rook through the pawn. So Labourdonnais should probably move this rook over to the wing to help his pawns across to the other side, but instead Labourdonnais pushes his f-pawn to block the attack, and McDonnell simply plays queen to h5. Now again, a good move for Labourdonnais might be to bring his rook back and try to give up the rook for the knight and just get the pawns across, because they're sufficiently advanced that there should be no trouble with this. However, he doesn't go for this again. He plays his bishop back to f8. And now I'd like to see if you can spot a good move for McDonnell in this position. I'll give you a couple of seconds. You can even pause the video if you like. So, of course, the move we were looking for was to activate beast mode and move the queen to g6. And now Labourdonnais is in a bit of a pickle. If he continues with his plan of pushing the pawns, then the knight's just going to capture this wing pawn. The g-pawn can't capture back because it's already pinned by the queen. And the king has only got one square to move to, h8. And of course, the knight will then just fork the king and pick up the rook. So that's no good for Labourdonnais. So what's he going to do? Well, he, in the end, decides to move his king to h8 straight away, but this doesn't help him because the knight's going to capture this pawn anyway. The pawn captures back, the king captures the f-pawn, which comes with a check, and it's a fork anyway on the rook. And we have the king coming back to g8, and of course, McDonnell manages to pick up the rook. So awesome from McDonnell, well done. That was why he was wearing the shades for most of this game. And the game continues with a3 from Labourdonnais. He's going to try and get those pawns across anyway, of course. And McDonnell moves his queen down to a5, maybe offering a bit of protection to his central pawn, but also trying to keep an eye on the passed wing pawns, which is still looking very dangerous. Now, Labourdonnais brings his rook over to d1, chasing the central pawn, which is looking a lot more dangerous than it did a little while ago. McDonnell simply brings his queen down to a4, attacking the rook, and now you might think that you can capture this pawn in the middle here, but if you were to do that, you would immediately get pinned by the queen against the king, and you'd lose your rook. So Labourdonnais spots this, and he just moves aside to d2 instead. Now, McDonnell does something interesting here. He decides to push the pawn into the path of the bishop. So Labourdonnais captures it, but this unblocks the path to the king for the queen. So the queen comes in for a check, the king moves aside, McDonnell checks him again on d7, and the king goes to f8. Maybe he's trying to shuffle over to the center of the board and try to get in behind the bishop. Queen to f5 with check, and here Labourdonnais moves his king to g7, which is actually a blunder. He could have maintained a draw. Had he have moved his king to e8, for example, queen to e6 check, blocked by the bishop, queen checks again, the king comes out the other side, and queen to f5 again and back to e8, so it's going to be a draw by repetition. However, instead of this king to e8 move, he played king to g7, and McDonnell is now winning by a lot. We have g5 and now bishop to e7, queen to e5 with check and king to g6, queen to e4 again with check, king back to f7, queen to f4 with check again, and this is sad for Bourdonnais because it's now again a king fork and he's lost his rook. So the king moves aside and the rook is collected by McDonnell, and we have the pawn captures and the queen centralizes to the middle of the board. And it was at this point that Bourdonnais had enough. The queen is just too strong against a bishop, and he resigned the game, leaving McDonnell 2-0 up in this third match. And everybody in the club was relieved the order had been restored. Bourdonnais was punished for not accepting the queen's gambit. So good job, well done McDonnell, better luck next time Bourdonnais, and I'll see you again next time.